Welcome to Sensitive Empowered with Alissa Boyer and myself, Matt Landsiedel. We both have our own businesses, but we come together once a month and we talk about all things related to being highly sensitive and empathic in this crazy world that can easily overwhelm us. And today we're going to be talking about relational dynamic. So we're going to be talking about the difference between having needs and being needy. I hear this all the time. Different types of attachment styles, people with anxious attachment styles, avoidant attachment styles. What does it mean to have needs, and what does it mean to kind of cross over into being needy? So we're going to unpack this today. What do you think, or why do you think HSP struggle to feel needy? Is our first question. What is the difference between having needs and being needy? We'll go directly into that. And how to know if a need is relational or should be fulfilled by you.
Mhm.
So I've been doing a lot of writing on this topic, some blogging. So I've got a lot to say on it, but I'm really curious to see how we unpack it together in our dynamic here. So let's kind of pull this right into the context of being highly sensitive. And why do you think HSP struggle with feeling needy?
Yeah, I love this conversation so much. When you brought this to me, I'm like, yes, we need this.
Hmm.
Um, because it's huge. So why I think HSP struggle with being needy is because our conditioning and what most of us heard for much of our life, where you're being too needy, you're being too much, you're being too sensitive, you're being too dramatic, you're too emotional. It's always like too much of something.
Hmm.
And when you're highly sensitive, you have different needs and different wiring than the people around you. Like highly sensitive people are, about 20-30% of the population. So I always say like you're wired differently than most people around you, and the way that you have to support yourself and live is going to simply look different. It's just the way it is. But with that then comes people misunderstanding your needs, misunderstanding your experience, and due to other people's conditioning as well. Maybe your mom told you, "Oh, you're too much, you're too needy," but maybe that's what she heard growing up. So when she sees you expressing your needs, having, crying, whatever, as a child, that can be triggering for her, and then that becomes something that you hear. And so what I find is a lot of HSPs then internalize that as, "Ooh, I'm wrong for having needs. I'm wrong for expressing myself. If I ask for what I need, it's going to be met with resistance. I'm going to upset people. I'm going to annoy people." And so it just becomes this narrative of I'm too needy, I'm too much, because that's what a lot of us have heard.
Yeah. Yeah, I second everything you said. That was such a beautiful summary, and I think that summarizes a lot of my experiences as well. And in my group coaching programs, I hear the same. It's almost like the same story over and over again from all people. It doesn't matter the groups that I do, and it is around the conditioning we have around emotions. Highly sensitive people, we have higher emotional reactivity. We feel our emotions more intensely, both positive and negative emotions, and I think the conditioning we carry around that is it's not okay for me to share myself, right? And I think when we do find somebody who is reliable and is able to be there for us and understand us, we might really grab on and be like, oh my gosh, it feels so nice for this person to really, right, understand me. And we might become needy because it's not often that we come across other people who really get us and really understand us. And I think a lot of us might carry shame. I know I do carry shame around, being emotional and having intense emotions. And there's a fear that I carry around bringing my needs into relationships. Around, I would describe myself as being hyper independent.
Hmm.
And I'm learning right now how to be vulnerable and how to bring my needs into relationships. And I'm like really seeing it as a trauma response. Like when I was younger and had needs, the needs going unmet, it's almost like I made a deal with myself from a young age. Like I'm just not going to have needs. I'm going to make myself an island. I'm not going to rely on anybody. But that's like, it just leads to so much like loneliness and isolation. And, um, I got to a point where I'm kind of like, I'm tired of that. And so coming out of, as being now a person with needs, I'm like, oh, it's so scary. And the thought of having to rely on somebody brings up a lot of stuff for me. And then I do notice that in romantic relationships, when the person starts to really understand me and know me, I can become codependent because I'm like, not many people get, I don't have that experience with many people. Right. So
Yeah.
that's for me, that fine line can really lead into, from having needs into being needy because it feels so good to be understood and seen and known by somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, you're right with that like fine line. And I think it's interesting because I feel like it's, a journey of finding the right balance for you because I feel like a lot of like the self-help stuff out there is often will almost gear too much to just focusing on yourself. Like don't rely on other people. Don't, you can do it all yourself. Like, it's like go within, which is important, but it often discounts the importance and necessity we have for relating to others and being able to also like learn to safely rely on another person and like learn how to express our needs to have them met. And a lot of times we'll go into, setting a rigid boundary and nope, I'm not dealing with this rather than having a conversation around getting our needs met because it can feel safer to just isolate, cut off, nope, versus the vulnerability of, hey, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I need. So it's really interesting and it takes a lot of like self-awareness and just looking at like, okay, am I doing this from a healthy place or am I doing, am I cutting myself off and setting this boundary from a healthy place or is it because I'm actually just avoiding the vulnerability of an honest conversation because I don't want to get turned down or I don't want to, upset or offend the other person. And yeah, finding that healthy balance because you're right, especially when you're sensitive and you felt misunderstood,
Mhm.
it's like a breath of fresh air when there's somebody who sees you and gets you. And it's like it can be something that you feel like you need and you crave. So it's like, how do you find that, yeah, that harmony, what works for you in a healthy way?
Yeah, exactly. What stood out in what you just shared is rejection, like fear, this fear that we might carry around being rejected. And I think if we do carry shame around having needs, when we start to first put ourselves out there, and I'm noticing this within myself, I'm putting myself out there, I have needs, I'm talking about my fears, and I am terrified of somebody not being there for me, right? Or being like, oh, you're too much, you're too needy, and then rejecting me, which perpetuates the wounding that a lot of us had when we were younger as highly sensitives, needs going unmet. We might create stories around I am not worthy of having my needs met. I'll be rejected. People will betray me. People aren't reliable, these sorts of things, and it perpetuates that. So I want to just honor, and for the listener viewer, like how well sensitive, how delicate of a topic this is, and how there's so many things tied into it, right? There's a lot of roots kind of connected to this one topic that can bring up a lot of stuff for us. And I'm curious for you, like, are you more on the hyper independent, codependent, or interdependent? Like, where do you naturally lie on there?
I think about at this point, I feel very interdependent. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been with my husband for almost 9 years, married for 4. It feels very solid. So at this point, it feels interdependent, but it's taken
Yeah.
years,
Mhm.
right? But
Yeah.
when we first met, I was way more codependent. I was very anxious. Um, but it's not like I was like the way I think about it is I was very much anxious and like self-abandoning. Not
Yeah.
I wasn't like I was getting my safety from making sure he was happy all of the time, but I wasn't like, you need to give me all of the compliments or you need to always like be there for me versus, you know what I mean? So it was more
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
a codependency in that way where I was like, I need to make sure he's happy and then I'm good. Lots of
Yeah.
anxiety. Um,
Yeah.
so that's kind of how it manifested at first. And I think we've talked about it in the past, but I healed a lot of my attachment wounds through a healthy relationship and seeing over time, okay, it's going to be okay. Like he's going
Yeah.
to be here for you. He's not going to leave you. Even though he doesn't meet my needs perfectly, every time because no
Yeah.
partner does,
Exactly. Yeah.
that has helped. So
Yeah.
that's how it is for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It makes me so happy. And you should pass that juju on to all of us because I'm like, I'm moving and I kind of ping pong between with a disorganized attachment. I can ping pong between hyper independent, codependent, but I'm really coming into this whole notion of energetically starting to feel what it means to be interdependent. And I still have a long ways to go in this area for sure. It's like I think one of my karmic growth points. Like I'm here on this planet to learn this and then teach it, which is why I'm doing a lot of writing about it so I can pass on the things I'm finding and all the little golden nuggets. So I love that for you. I love that you're experiencing interdependency because there's nothing more special than being in a connection where we can just land. We don't have to
Yes.
be hyper vigilant. We don't have to be worrying. We can just be trusting of ourselves and the other person. And yeah, I think that's really special. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because it's something I just don't think about. It just
Mhm.
is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember when I first met my husband that something that I thought about, even though I was like so insecure and whatever, was like, I want somebody who we complement each other. So it's not like you complete me. The whole of us is better than us apart. If that makes
Yeah.
sense, it like we amplify each other. So that's how I've always kind of, or not always, but that's how I now view relationships. It's like it's an amplifier versus like I need this in order to survive kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that mindset has been healthy for me as well.
Yeah. And I like that. So maybe that is a great segue into the next question. Like, what is the difference between having needs and being needy? Like, I'm hearing from you, it's not about needing something from the other person to survive. Like, you're going to survive on your own. You know that. So, like, how do you discern the difference between these two things, having needs and being needy?
Okay, when I think of like being needy, it's like looking to somebody else to fill voids within you. So let's say, if I'm feeling it's so complicated, but let's say I'm feeling insecure about something like at work or like I'm work at work and I feel insecure. Um, if I'm in a needy state, I might be feeling insecure and then start to kind of pick at him like, you don't even think I'm pretty. You never compliment me and kind of going into that place because there's a void within me that feels insecure. And so I'm needing this versus it's fine if I feel insecure about my work, but it's like being able to voice that, like, hey, this is kind of, I'm feeling this way. Can we talk about this? I'm just needing a little extra support. And so to me, it's like you can learn to be okay with having needs and be aware of your needs as a result of knowing who you are and like knowing your value and worth. Because what I've experienced at least is like when I was in a state of low self-worth, didn't really value myself, had a lot of shame for who I was. It I felt like the needs that I had were too much, like by default, versus when I'm aware of who I am and I love myself as I am, I can kind of discern if something feels off within me, like it's okay and I deserve to talk this through with my partner versus shame telling me, no, you're a loser and like you should figure this out. So I know that's
Yeah.
not a very clear answer. It's kind of like still murky, but that's kind of how I
Yeah.
see it. It's like I always see it as like you're trying to have the other person feel something within you that maybe you need to look at first before you're like going to them.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. And this is a murky topic. There's so much gray area in it because there's lots of things that come into play, like context.
Mhm.
Context of, okay, is this, the other person's job to meet this for me, or is this my job to meet this for me? There's so many things that come into play. Um, yeah, I kind of I'll just read what I wrote because I did a blog on this and I think it's kind of, it'll be easier to unpack that way. So, in regards to having needs, like we all have needs, first of all. This is so important and we all have relational needs, we all have personal needs. Where people struggle is being able to discern which is whose responsibility. But that's such a gray area because again, context will play a different thing or a different role in that. Um, so when it comes to being needy, I wrote down it refers to an excessive or imbalanced reliance on others to fulfill emotional needs.
Mhm.
People who exhibit needy behavior often seek constant reassurance, approval, or attention from others in a way that may feel overwhelming to those around them. It's not the existence of the needs themselves that's problematic, but rather the way these needs are being expressed. And I wrote down often with fear and scarcity.
Oh.
So when we're approaching our needs from fear or scarcity, we're going to be filtering them through our wounding, through our self-limiting beliefs, and we're going to be outsourcing our authority and power onto the other person. That's when it can start to bleed into neediness. However, I could say out of the same side of my mouth is that whenever if I'm scared and I have a need to feel safe and to feel comforted, that doesn't mean that I'm being needy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an over reliance and over excessive use of needs is going to be, I would say, so intensity, frequency, duration, intention. These four pillars kind of are going to really define, you know, am I having a need or am I being needy, right? And I would say frequency would probably be a big one. Like, am I constantly going to this person for this thing and not willing to do the deep inner work that's required in order to maybe heal this part of me that's scared? So again, that's why it feels murky and unclear because we're saying the same thing, but it's really there's little nuances that really discern. And then, so I go on to write some key differences. Okay. So the first one is healthy expression versus over dependence. Okay. So when you have needs, you express them clearly and calmly, allowing others space to respond appropriately. You can meet many of your own emotional needs. And when you reach out for support, it's balanced. Being needy means leaning too heavily on others for validation or support. You might expect others to constantly fulfill your needs in ways that aren't realistic, putting pressure on them and the relationship. So again, this is going to be like frequency.
Yep.
Okay. And then under like intention, I would say confidence versus fear of rejection. So when we're having needs and we're empowered, we're feeling confident about having needs. And when we're feeling needy, we tend to be, it might be coming from a place of fear, fearing rejection. And then the third one is clear communication versus emotional exhaustion. So, and this would again probably be more under the intention one. So, when you're in touch with your needs, you're able to communicate them effectively. You ask for what you need without guilt or pressure. Needy behavior can lead to indirect communication, such as guilt tripping, manipulation, or constant seeking of attention, leaving others feeling drained and overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
So being needy is often you'll feel like you're being manipulative, you're being dishonest, you're right. There's gonna be a flavor of that which is rooted in fear. And so yeah, what are your thoughts about some of those things?
I think like you couldn't have laid it out better because it's like as murky of a topic as it is, you did lay out like, hey, here's the differences in how it would feel. And I think that's like the underlying thing that we can like kind of start to notice within ourselves because you're right, it has a different flavor. And if you sit with yourself, you know when you're coming at a place from like, I need this because it feels like fuel to me. And if I don't get this reassurance, then I'm really scared that this person's going to leave me and things aren't okay. Versus like the confidence, sharing your needs without guilt, just knowing like, hey, I can sense that my tank is empty and I need to express this need to my partner and I'm not, it just feels different.
Yeah.
And also, like you said, the frequency of it is important to note as well. Like if you're constantly like seeking that reassurance, it's like, okay, here's a sign that it's coming from more of a needy place and you're trying to fill something within. And what I hear with a lot of it too is people I think there's a huge lack of self-trust for people. And so they often are like, well, I don't know like how I feel or if I'm being too much. And so it's like just being able to start to kind of observe yourself without judgment can be really interesting. But I would say, for the person who does struggle with their own self-confidence and self-worth, it's more likely that you might have those tendencies to look externally for other people to make you feel better because there's something within you that is kind of not feeling enough. Again, I can just say that from personal experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so I think that's really important. And the other thing that has been coming into my head as we're talking is like, I heard someone say, like in relationships, it's rare that both people are going to be able to show up and give 100% each day. And like that can also be a really healthy interdependent relationship is when like your partner is at 20% that day, they didn't sleep well, they're not feeling great, and they can voice that to you. And then you can show up with the other 80% for them. It's like, hey, I know I'm going to carry a little bit more today, and that's okay. But that can come from being able to express your needs, like just letting the other person know. So it's again like a healthy reliance. Um, But yeah, I would say the main thing is like, okay, feel that difference inside of you. And I feel like there could be kind of a compulsive feeling as well with like the neediness, right? Where it's like, I need
Yeah.
to do this or else it doesn't feel good. I'm afraid. It's like that fear
Yeah.
based.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. What stood out to me in what you shared was self-trust.
Yeah.
I am such a late bloomer in this area, and I'm actually working on that in my EMDR sessions right now. Is like self-trust, and maybe we can even unpack that in one of our future ones because there's so much alive there.
Would
I think
love
we've
to.
done something similar, but we can unpack it again from new, fresh perspective.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm a late bloomer in also understanding what my needs are. And I attribute this to a lot of dissociating from a young age. And I think this is a very common story for HSPs. The world's very intense and overwhelming. So we learn to cope with it by dissociating. And then we wonder why we don't have a developed sense of self and we aren't connected to our needs and our power because we aren't feeling our emotions. Emotions are the birthplace of understanding our needs and really getting clear with that. So a lot of the journey back home for HSPs is to come into their emotional connection with themselves from a place of presence and attunement to self. They get the data, which is their needs. Then they start to trust themselves because they can make better decisions that are like really built around getting their needs met. That leads to empowerment. So really, this conversation is so important for highly sensitive people, in my opinion.
Yes, so important. Yeah, and when I think about the HSP who struggles with self-trust, getting to know their emotions, it's like I know sh healing shame is a huge part of your work. It's like feeling, knowing how to feel your emotions and like not making yourself wrong for having them. Like I feel like that's just like such a huge part of it because then from there it's like, okay, this is how I feel. This is valid and I am a worth enough person, worthy enough person to be able to share what my needs are. I
Yeah.
feel like it's just such a like puzzle that kind of has to come
Yeah.
together in order for people to like confidently express themselves, know what they need. And I feel like it's an ever evolving process too, as
Mhm.
you go through life changes and you change and you're figuring new things out. It's, ever evolving and like,
Totally.
yeah, tuning into
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, to the million-dollar question. And I'll actually talk about the inspiration behind this question because like I said, I wrote about this exact topic I wrote in my newsletter last week and then turned it into a blog. But I had one of my avid readers and watches our this as well. She'll be watching right now. So hello, I don't want to give out her name, but so she wrote to me, she said, I find it difficult to recognize if a need is relational or it needs to be fulfilled by me
Mm,
because we are so bound by systems, geography, societal understanding, and family. It seems possible only if you escape and find a cocoon of like-minded people or a tribe. Is there a way to recognize what is relational and what is mine? What I do currently is assume it all to be mine, which is hyper-independence, or then swing to naming it all on the other person, which is codependence, really, at the end of the day, or dependence. So this sounds like me, which is probably why she follows my work, because this is very much, I would assume this person has a disorganized attachment style because they ping pong between hyper independence and dependence. Anxious people are going to be more independent, avoidant people are going to be more hyper independent. And if you're a ping ponger, you're going to likely have a disorganized attachment style. That's an assumption I'm making, but there's a generalization to it. So the question is, how to know if a need is relational or should be fulfilled by you?
hmm
So, what's your take on this? Because I know, and I have a feeling that you might have learned this through your relationship. Like in the early stages, you were more codependent. How did you learn to discern between the need being relational and the need being having to be met by you?
So for me, what I've learned, my default is always to look at myself first. So I always think clean up my side of the street before I go right into like saying if it's his or mine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's really how I start. It's like, okay, let's say I feel triggered and upset by something.
Mhm.
First what I'll do is kind of look at like, okay, is this triggering situation hitting on an insecurity of mine? Am I feeling tired? Am I, kind of is this reminding me of something that happened in the past? And I go within first and I kind of just like assess like what's going on for me here and is this something that I can actually support myself through? Um, and if it's something where I'm like, no, this is actually an unmet need that I have in my relationship, then I can have that conversation. So, like, let's say, like, this isn't actually the case for us, but it's the thing that comes to mind. Let's say I'm like, get really mad every time I see dishes in the sink and it just like triggers me. And I go within and I'm like, oh, am I just triggered by this because, I realize like, oh, it makes me feel unseen and like like not valued in our home. And he just like doesn't do anything. Like, is that what's going on?
Mhm.
Right? If so, then I could express, hey, the unmet need is like, I feel like I'm doing everything. This makes me feel not valued. What I need is for you to support with this. Um, or on the flip side, could I look at it and be like, you know what, most of the time he does it. Like he's had a really busy day at work. Like actually I can handle it. So it's a very like
Mhm.
logical, like tangible kind of example, but that's in my mind where I go to. Because when we first got together, I was way more reactionary and I would immediately go into um, a lot of like self-blame, if something was wrong um, and immediately like, yeah, just react versus like have a moment within myself to kind of discern. So that's my approach. And
Yeah.
it's honestly created a lot more harmony because
Yeah.
a lot of times it's like I don't know. I can't even say a percentage of the time, but it's always I have found a worthy thing to just look at yourself first, what projections you might have, what triggers you might have
Mhm.
before you immediately are like, I need this type of thing. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but that's like my first kind of thoughts on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's cool because I can totally tell that you have an interdependent, secure relationship. Like
Oh,
totally. It's just the way you talk about it. I can
yeah.
energetically feel it, which is really cool. And I kind of look at like interdependency as like um you have the ability to self-regulate and you have the ability to co-regulate, right?
Yeah.
Self-regulation coming from our ability to co-regulate when we were younger, right? And self-regulation is being able to be there for ourselves, right? We can reach within, and
Mhm.
then co-regulation is reach out. So reach within and reach out are two important things to have when you're practicing interdependency. And then I love the you use the word discernment. I think that is so important because we need to look at many different things. Like I said, my answer to this question is it's great. It's going to be it depends, right? Because there's so many factors like context, previous relationship history. Have you been reaching out to this person 10 times this week? Right? Like that will indicate whether or not you should be reaching out to them again because maybe it's time to reach out to someone else or to reach within um, relationship agreement, right? Like, are you committed to this person? Are they someone that you should be reaching out, or did you just start dating them? You've gone on 2 dates with them and you're reaching out to them for significant emotional support, probably, right? There's so many things that come into play here to answer this question, but I put together a 7-step process. I love me a good process,
Yes.
and to gain more clarity, because that's at the end of the day, this person's wanting clarity on her needs and where this might be coming from, the birthplace of what this need is coming from, and how to get it met. So the first step of the process is to learn your attachment style. Like you can't do this work unless you understand your attachment style, which is how you attach to people, the beliefs you have around needs and getting needs met. Are you hyper independent or codependent? You really need to know this before. And then once you know your attachment style, you can ask yourself questions like, in this moment, am I feeling hyper independent? Am I feeling codependent? Where is this coming from? So if you shine the light of awareness on this, it's going to give you insight into some of these automatic patterns that you might be displaying when it comes to, time to get your needs met. So once you understand, okay, I'm coming from hyperindependence or codependence or interdependence, you can just remind yourself. And I'm writing this mostly to people with an insecure attachment style because people that are already practicing interdependence and have security, they're probably not going to be reading my stuff. um, so just remind yourself that your needs matter and you are worthy of having your needs met, that you're capable of meeting your own needs, that people can be reliable if you give them a chance. This is all about trust, trusting in yourself, trusting in others, and just reminding yourself that you're capable of trusting, even if your childhood showed you differently, right? Things can change, people can change, you can change. So you're able to, develop trust if that's what you want to do, you can set that intention. And then I think it's the most important part of this process is just like you said, like looking at like and discerning where is this coming from? Is this need request coming from a place of fear or love?
Mm-hmm.
My way of discerning is whenever I'm coming from fear, and whenever there's an unmet need from fear, I ruminate.
Ooh.
Rumination is a sign of an unmet need. So if you're ruminating, it's coming from fear. If it's coming from love, you're not going to be all hung up and ruminating. You're just going to go to your partner and say, "Hey, listen, like hand on heart, like this is what I'm needing." Like that's a very, right? That's how we want to get good at making need requests. But if we're ruminating and worrying and all these things, it's likely coming from fear, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But the key is going to be to let the person know, "Hey, I'm scared." Right? And sometimes even just admitting fear and being vulnerable is enough to start to soften ourselves so we can come from a place of having needs versus being needy, right? And then exploring with yourself, like what would it feel like to meet this need myself?
Mm.
What would it feel like to have somebody meet this with me? Right. And I use that word very deliberatively, like with me as opposed to for me, because I think when we're getting our needs met, it is a with process. It's co-creative. Somebody, even if we're outsourcing it to someone to meet it, they're not really meeting it for us. They're meeting it with us because we have to be willing to receive. So we're
Mhm.
playing a role in this whole like dance of reciprocity. And then I find for me, it feels better when I do it that way because I'm not outsourcing. I'm saying, hey, we're doing this together. You're meeting this need with me, and it's like it's a team effort. And I think that is also a sign of an interdependent, secure relationship. Is it's like we are a team. We're working together to make sure that both of us feel safe and secure to get our needs met.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, and I'll put this all, I'm going to attach the blog in the show notes of this so you'll have it, you'll be able to kind of read up on all this. But the sixth step is to take action. If the rumination won't stop, like you got to go towards it, whether it's coming from fear or love, it doesn't matter because in the early stages of healing and secure attachment, we have to like find what you have right now, Alyssa, which is like a safe relationship that can be reparative and corrective and healing. And you can heal some of these attachment wounds within a safe container. I think it's so important because we can't do that in our container with our attachment figures anymore. Right. We're past that stage. So we have to find another type of attachment where we can start to heal these wounds. And then the last step is diversify your who meets my needs portfolio, and practice something called social mobility, which is like, this person can't be my only source of getting my needs met. So I have to have friends, I have to have family, I have to have a therapist or a coach, and you have kind of your eggs in different baskets. So one person isn't completely reliant on or you're not relying on one person to meet all your needs, which I would say is another sign of being needy when you have put all your eggs in one basket and you don't have other sources of support to help you. Yeah.
Yeah. I love all of that. I love how like
Mhm.
clearly it's laid out like 7 steps. Like, yes. And I just lit up at your last one too of diversifying because that like sparked something. Like that was something that I did early on in my relationship as well when I recognized that like if I want to talk about like business things or if I want to talk about, when I was in the corporate world and I wanted to like vent about some work drama, like my husband was not the person for all of that. And like I was being disappointed and frustrated when he didn't respond in the way that I wanted because it's not all him to meet those different needs that I have. And so it's like you said, knowing, like being able to diversify, having that self-awareness, like, um, yeah, and having the just like self-trust to just kind of be like, okay, it's okay. Or I don't even know if self-trust is the word, but like it's just like it's okay that one person isn't able to meet every single need. Like that would actually not be a healthy thing anyway if I'm just relying on them. Like it's actually good for me to be able to like expand the net wider. And that doesn't mean that that person isn't enough for me. It just means they're one part of my life, although a big chunk. Um, I just love all of that. I felt like that was so clear, but that's just like one piece too that I felt like people can get really caught up and it actually causes so much strain and pressure on one person to meet every single need versus having the discernment. Again, there's that word of
Yeah.
who's the best person to support me with this. Like, and I like also what you said, using the word with, not meet this need with me, not for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And I want to take something that actually you taught me or I heard from you
Oh.
is embrace messy action because this process is messy. Relationships are messy. Don't feel like you need to get it perfect. If you outsource a need that maybe you should have done yourself, that's fine. That's okay. You can always come back to yourself. If you try and be hyper independent and be the island and you find yourself lonely and isolated, you can always reach out again. Like, so this is, it's just, don't expect to be perfect at this. I think it's, learn as you grow. I think it's important.
Yeah, such an important note. It's exactly it.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, let's normalize having needs. So I want the audience, if you're watching on YouTube, to write in the comments below, what are some needs that you have? Both personally, could be a need that you have for yourself, but also a relational need. What needs do you bring into relationships? And I'd love to hear from you, Alissa. What's one need that's really, really important to you that keeps coming up as a theme in your relationship?
In this season of my life, it's a need to feel seen for all that I carry as a mom and a
Mm,
business owner, because sometimes the work can feel unseen. It's a lot of just like the day-to-day things, but it can be a heavy burden. And I've found that even just having the acknowledgement of like, you're doing a great job. Wow, that must have been a lot today. Just like those simple things can really make me feel seen and loved. And that's something I've had to express because in the times where I didn't feel that, I felt resentful and like my work didn't matter.
mm,
And it was a matter of, hey, this is how I'm feeling. It would be helpful to just like kind of hear this feedback sometimes, and it helps a lot. So
mm.
that's the biggest one at this point. How about for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, so I'm hearing like validation, like you're wanting
Mhm.
validation, like that's so important to you, and like, and that you're doing great. So I will give it to you right now. You are doing amazing,
Oh,
and
thank you.
you got all these things, you got your hands in all these pots, and you're being a mom, you're an amazing coach, mentor, you're showing up for these, like you're doing a great job.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. For myself, I think there's so many. I'm really coming into a lot of this, but I think one of them is for someone to practice curiosity with me. I feel like a complex being. I've got a lot going on. My mind's always churning. I've always got ideas. Like I want somebody that can coax me out of me and take an interest in me. And I think just genuine uh, curiosity is a really beautiful need that I have in relationship. It allows me to feel seen,
Yeah.
understood, known, connected to, right? And that's another thing I might say to wrap up is like, why ask yourself, why do you need this need,
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what is it actually providing for you? Because I
Yeah.
think you can really get clear. And I think when we lead from that place of like, this is why I need this need, that's the vulnerable part. And when our partner sees the vulnerability in us and that's why we need it, I think that's a real gift. And we're way more likely to get our needs met when we're being vulnerable as opposed to when we're being critical or manipulative or these sorts of things.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a beautiful thing for people to just like look at. Yeah.
Mhm.
So important. Being
Yeah.
the need to be seen is enough right there.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for having this conversation with me. It feels good to talk to somebody about this because it does feel murky and it feels, and I think we should really normalize having these conversations. So if you're listening or watching this, pick a friend that you want to have this conversation with and have a conversation about needs and what it's like to have needs because it feels really freaking good to talk
Yeah.
about some of this stuff. Yeah.
I know. I feel like as murky as it is, I felt like we untangled a lot and I feel a lot more clarity. So I really enjoyed this too. It was really
Yeah,
good.
good. Good. All right. Well, until next time, we'll see you all in a month or so. We'll see.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.